What is the first planet you ever learned? Mercury, Earth, Mars? Now ask yourself this: did you discover it? Or did it appear the moment you thought of it? Close your eyes. Try to imagine a solar system with no observer, no scientist, no telescope, no stargazer. Try to visualize planets swirling through a void, devoid of meaning, unmeasured, unnamed. Do they still exist? Or are they born only when observed? The trap begins here. Let's start with Mercury, the smallest, the fastest, the closest. It hugs the sun like a secret. But this is no ordinary orbit. Mercury moves in ways Newton never truly explained. Its precession, the way its orbit subtly twists, is too precise, too stubborn, too inconvenient. For centuries, physicists were haunted by the question, why? Newton's laws couldn't explain it. The numbers were wrong. The orbit was wrong. And so, for a time, they invented a planet that didn't exist, Vulcana, ghost rock, orbiting the sun, conjured only to make the math add up. But Vulcan was never found. It wasn't real. The equations were not wrong. Reality was. Then Einstein arrived, whispering madness dressed as genius. He showed us that Mercury's strange behavior wasn't a flaw in the cosmos. It was a flaw in how we understood space itself. Time and space weren't separate. Gravity wasn't a force. Planets don't orbit because they're being pulled. They fall freely through curves in the fabric of existence. Mercury didn't betray physics. Physics betrayed us. What we thought was absolute was just an approximation. Mercury became the first proof that reality is elastic. What else bends when you look closely? Now look inward. Your mind orbits the concept of truth the way Mercury orbits the sun, fast, unstable, warped by forces you can't see. You chase certainty, but the closer you get, the more it slides sideways, just out of reach. Like Mercury's precession, your thoughts don't return to the same place. You think you're retracing the same path, but something has shifted, slightly, subtly, enough to break your logic. You spiral. There's a term for this: cognitive precession. You revisit a memory, and each time it changes, recolored by mood, context, fear. You believe you are recalling, but you are rewriting. Nothing loops cleanly. The orbit decays. The mind warps, just like Mercury, just like space, just like the lie you told yourself yesterday. Do you feel the heat now? The closeness to something you can't quite name? Mercury is the hottest mind state. Too close to the center, too exposed. There are no moons here, no shadows, no rest. You orbit the source of light, and imagine your consciousness as a solar system. Each planet represents a part of you: thought, desire, fear, memory, habit, hunger, will. They all revolve around something central, something blinding your awareness. The you think of when you say I, that's the sun. But what if that sun isn't stable? What if it isn't a star at Albatahol, not emitting light but devouring it? What if the I is not real? What if it's a placeholder, an illusion created by the orbiting parts to justify their motion? In that case, Mercury, the closest part of you to the lie, would feel the distortion first. And that's exactly what it does. It doesn't orbit the truth. It suffers. It endures the tidal tearing of a gravitational idea that doesn't love it back. Mercury is the mind's agony, the need to understand, even as understanding burns you. Psychologists might call it hyperawareness, that intense, anxious fixation on your own thoughts. It's the state of overthinking yourself into non-existence. You analyze a feeling until it vanishes. You question your purpose until the question becomes the answer. It's staring too long into the mental sun and going blind from the inside out. You felt it at 3 a.m. when the world is quiet but your mind screams. When you question whether anyone actually knows you, whether you know yourself, whether there's a self at all. Welcome to Mercury, the furnace of thought. No air, no water, no mercy. Only speed, only proximity to madness. There is no peace here, no rotation that aligns with comfort. Did you know Mercury rotates 3 times for every 2 times it orbits the Sun? It doesn't spin like Earth. It synchronizes in a strange, lopsided dance. You might say it's trapped in a rhythm it didn't choose, just like you. Your days don't align with your emotions. Your routines mismatch your inner clock. You wake when you want to sleep. You laugh when you feel empty. You say, "I'm fine," when you're on fire inside. This is the mind in resonance with something it doesn't understand. This is Mercury's song. A song with no melody, just repetition and imbalance. But let's go deeper. What is orbit, really? It's falling, forever. An object in orbit is falling toward the thing it revolves around, but sideways, fast enough to miss. That's the secret. That's the horror. Planets don't float. They fall, and so do you. You are in free fall around your own consciousness. You think you're standing still, making decisions, building identity, but you're falling around a center you don't understand. A sun you never question, an idea that might not even exist, and it never ends. You are Mercury. You are the orbiting lie. Now step outside your own metaphor. Think of Mercury not as a planet, but as a thought. The first thought, the one that ignites all others, the one that says, "I am here." But what if that thought is mistaken? What if the first thought is already corrupted? What if the original premise, your very existence, is a misfire? Then everything that follows, every belief, every memory, every identity is just a warped orbit around a broken center. This is not hypothetical. This is your brain. Your sense of self is constructed from fragments, chemical shadows, stitched together by neurons. The illusion of continuity. But consciousness is not a point. It is a process. And that process can be hacked, broken, misaligned, just like Mercury's orbit once was. You are not whole. You are orbiting pieces, pretending to be a planet. You are Mercury and the Sun. The Sun is not watching. Still think you're at the center? Still think the planets are out there? Still think you can draw a line between your thoughts and the universe? Then answer this. If Mercury only exists when observed, and your thoughts only exist when you think them, what happens when you stop? Do you vanish? And if you vanish, who's left to remember? The Sun. What if the solar system doesn't revolve around you? What if you are just the dream of a planet that never was? What if Vulcan was real, but you weren't? Have you ever watched a storm from space? A hurricane, perfectly circular, moving with slow, indifferent violence, destruction, rendered elegant by distance. Venus is that storm, frozen in planetary form. A world that spins backward, smothered in its own heat, cloaked in clouds so thick that even sunlight gives up. This is not a place, it's a psychological state. Venus is beauty turned hostile, a mirror that loves you just enough to trap you in your reflection. It's the voice that says, "Look how perfect everything is," while you suffocate beneath its expectations. If Mercury is the raw intensity of knowing too much, Venus is the unbearable elegance of knowing just enough to hurt you. Its atmosphere is a pressure chamber 92 times that of Earth. Its clouds are acid, its surface hot enough to melt lead. But from afar it shines, it glows, it tempts. This is the paradox of appearances, the lie of closeness, the trap of beauty. You've seen it in people, the ones who seem perfect, untouchable, polished. You orbit them emotionally, convinced that proximity will bring warmth. But Venus does not warm, Venus burns. And what looks like light is often just reflection. Psychologically, Venus is cognitive dissonance dressed as desire. It's what happens when your beliefs collide with your actions, when the thing you want is also the thing that destroys you. You say, "I love them," even as they hollow you out. You whisper, "I'm okay," as your world simmers under the surface. The atmosphere of Venus is thick with carbon dioxide. Greenhouse gone mad, a runaway feedback loop. The more heat it traps, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the more heat it traps. A loop without escape. Sound familiar? You do this with thoughts. You notice an anxiety. You fear it. The fear amplifies the anxiety. Now you fear the fear. That's a runaway mind. That's Venus. And the planet doesn't even rotate like Earth. One day on Venus lasts longer than its year. Time itself stretches unnaturally there, bending perception. You can stand on Venus's surface and see the sun rise in the west, climb slowly, then reverse direction and set where it came from. Time is not stable here. How often does your internal clock betray you? Some moments dragging like gravity, others slipping by without form. Venus is that distortion, the psychological warping of time under emotional pressure. The brain interprets time not linearly, but exponentially. The more emotionally dense a moment is, the longer it feels. A trauma freezes time. A panic attack stretches seconds into hours. A heartbreak echoes in loops. Venus, with its thick atmosphere and backward spin, is a mind turned against its self-processing emotion without resolution, looping without logic. You don't leave Venus, you dissolve into it. It's no accident that Venus is named after the goddess of love. But this isn't love as comfort. This is love as gravity. It's the idea of emotion the way you think love should look. Smooth, unbroken, glowing, even if it's unlivable. You've built Venuses in your own life, people. Ideas, selves, you maintain just for how they appear. You construct identities not to be, but to be seen, to shimmer, to convince, even if what's beneath is boiling. Let's look deeper. Imagine peeling away Venus's clouds. You'd find a surface that's barely been reshaped in billions of years. No tectonic movement, no evolution, just stagnation, imprisoned in perfection. What thoughts have you left unchanged for too long? What beliefs have you buried beneath? Thick layers of appearances. There's a name for this in psychology too. Confirmation bias. Venus, by surrounding it with clouds thick enough to blind you. But it's worse than blindness. It's self-deception engineered into comfort. You believe you're a good person, so you ignore the damage you've done. You believe you're unlovable, so you filter out every sign of affection. You create a planet of mirrors, each one reinforcing the next. Venus does not reflect reality. It reflects your reflection of it. Just like your mind, just like your memory, just like your identity. Venus is ego made planetary. It doesn't spin to match the sun. It spins in defiance, backward, slow, as if refusing to be understood. And maybe that's what you are, too. A psychological Venus so buried in survival, so terrified of truth that your spin is reversed, your air is poison, and your days stretch into years of unprocessed emotion. It's beautiful, and it's unbearable. Now do this. Think of someone who adored you once. Think of their words, their smile. Just hold them, the warmth and the acid, the smile and the silence, the memory and the rot beneath it. That pressure right now in your chest, that's Venus. Do you feel it? A storm of sulfuric acid that never ends, wins faster than sound, beauty that cannot be touched. This is what it means to remember and disbelieve at once, to want and resist, to believe you know someone and realize you never did, to orbit someone who doesn't spin with you. In physics, we call this tidal locking, when a smaller body is forced into sync with a larger one. Its rotation slows until one side always faces the master. Venus is almost there, almost synchronized, but not quite. It disobeys. Are you still orbiting someone in your mind who has long stopped spinning with you? Do you still try to stay beautiful for someone who's no longer watching? Are you still locked to a version of yourself that never actually lived? Then you are not living. You are performing. And Venus always rewards performance with pressure. Here's a disturbing thought. If you landed on Venus, you wouldn't even see the surface. The clouds would blind you. The pressure would crush you. The heat would melt you before you could scream. And yet above it, all the planet looks like a star. From Earth, Venus is the brightest object in the night sky after the moon. That's the final trap, even now. From your safe distance, you admire her. You look up and call her beautiful. You trace her path across the sky. She seduces you into forgetting what she really is, just like your mind does. You romanticize your pain. You poeticize your trauma. You make art out of your ruin because the truth is too heavy to hold. You call it healing. To remove the illusions is to remove your ability to cope. So what do? You look from a distance. You adore what you cannot approach. You orbit what will never orbit you, and you call it love. But let me ask you this. If your mind creates the clouds, if your emotions generate the pressure, if your identity spins in defiance of time and truth, then who are you really orbiting? And how long until you become the storm you can no longer see through? Close your eyes. Now imagine standing on the edge of nothing. A horizon so flat, so unforgiving, it feels like the very concept of shape has collapsed. No trees, no sky, just a scorched, colorless desert where the sun bleeds directly into your skin and shadows don't survive. This is Mercury. But it's not just the first planet. It's a mirror to the first place your mind goes when silence becomes too loud, when thought strips itself of story and leaves you naked with truth. Mercury is the raw beginning, the unfiltered cognition, the scream before the voice. Let's begin again. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, but strangely, it's not the hottest. That title belongs to Venus. No, Mercury is the one that burns during the day and freezes at night, with a difference of over 600 degrees Celsius between light and darkness. This is not a planet. It's a mind caught between extremes. Your thoughts do this. You switch between emotional fire and emotional void, rage, then numbness, hope, then collapse, memory, then oblivion. Mercury doesn't hold an atmosphere. It's too small, too weak. Solar winds tear it apart before it can settle. Just like the thoughts you try to stabilize before anxiety shreds them. Mercury is the mind before context, before comfort, before illusion. It is raw exposure. You can't breathe here. Not because there's no oxygen, but because there's nothing to dilute the heat of truth. Mercury forces you to look at the core of what you are, a creature spinning between two extremes, pretending there's a middle, but there is no middle. Here, think about how often you lie to yourself just to maintain balance. It's not that bad, I'm just tired, this will pass. Mercury doesn't let you lie. Mercury doesn't pass. Its rotation is strange, exactly 2/3 of its orbit. For every 2 spins, it completes 3 laps around the sun. This resonance creates a rhythm that's alien to our sense of time. This is the rhythm of trauma, of memory that loops but never lands, of thoughts that circle back just when you think you've escaped. It's like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize it's part of a larger dream. This is the trap. Your mind keeps time differently when it's in pain. Moments stretch, but not evenly. Some memories decay. Others stay radioactive. Mercury is that radiation. Not loud, not bright, just always there. Now imagine this. You're standing on Mercury's surface. The sun is 11 times brighter than it is from Earth. Shadows are sharp. Everything feels too close. There's no atmosphere to scatter the light, so it cuts directly into your eyes. There is no mercy in Mercury's illumination. This is what it feels like when insight arrives too early, when you realize a truth before you're ready to accept it. When you see clearly, but the clarity only wounds you deeper. It's a psychological burn. Knowledge before integration. Exposure before readiness. People talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. But what if the light is just Mercury's? Sunlight, merciless, absolute, uncaring. What if enlightenment is just a form of heat stroke? Because here's the real question. What happens when you get too close to what you worship? We orbit goals, ideals, people telling ourselves that if we just get close enough, we'll feel whole. But Mercury is proof that proximity doesn't equal peace. The closer you get to the source, the more violently you're unmade. Just like Mercury, you were once small, bright, unfinished. But you got too close to something, someone too intense. A parent's expectations, a teacher's dismissal, a lover's silence. And slowly, the outer layers were stripped away. Atmosphere gone. Protection burned off. Now you're exposed. Here's the twist. Mercury didn't shatter, it adapted. It became resilient by embracing instability. You did too, didn't you? You learned how to think faster, feel sharper, anticipate threats before they arrive. That's Mercury, the anxious mind weaponized. Its surface is scarred with craters, impact after impact, yet it keeps spinning. Every mark, a story, every scar, a clock. But there's no erosion here, no wind, no rain, nothing to smooth the pain. Your mind does the same. Your past doesn't fade, it just fossilizes. You pretend it's behind you, but it's engraved. Of your earliest memory, no, earlier, the one before language, the first fear, the first abandonment. The first silence that felt like punishment. That's your personal Mercury. You never left it. You built everything else around it. Psychologically, we call this the primal wound, the first rupture of trust, the original fracture that shaped every belief that came after. You've spent your life orbiting that wound. And just like Mercury's orbit, it's not a circle. It's elliptical. You get closer, you burn, you pull away, you freeze, and the cycle repeats. There's no comfort in orbit, only momentum. You think you've grown, moved on, found balance, but the gravity is still there, and gravity doesn't ask permission. It just pulls. There's more. Despite being small, Mercury has a magnetic field. Scientists don't fully understand it. It shouldn't exist, not with a core so old. But it does. Your mind does the same. You attract what you can't explain. Patterns, people, pain. You say, why do I always end up here? Why does this keep happening? You don't realize you are Mercury. You are magnetic in your wounding. You draw in repetition. You crave what hurt you. You invite what broke you. Why? Because Mercury doesn't get to choose its orbit, and neither did you. We think of free will as a blank slate. But what if it's a pre-written map shaped by invisible gravity wells inside your own skull? Your earliest environments wrote your script. Your subconscious obeys that script, and your consciousness tells itself it's driving. But what if it's not? What if you're just a passenger in your own orbit? There's a myth in astronomy that Mercury is lifeless, inert. But new data shows that it still shrinks its crust, compressing, cracking inch, century by century. It's still changing, still suffering silently. How long have you been silently shrinking under pressure no one sees? How long have you smiled like a planet glowing in sunlight while your mind cracks beneath? There's something ancient and awful in Mercury's stillness. A reminder that the most damaged things are also the most disciplined. They can't afford not to be. Mercury doesn't rage. It endures, just like you. But endurance is not healing. Survival is not peace. Stillness is not safety. You've been orbiting pain so long, you forgot what distance feels like. Let me ask you, if you've never left the orbit of that first wound, if your mind still burns and freezes in cycles you don't control, if your entire sense of self is built around a scar you never consented to, then what is freedom? And have you ever actually felt it? Or only imagined what it might look like from the surface of someone else's world? Have you ever watched yourself smile in a mirror and felt like the reflection wasn't yours? Not broken, not distorted, just foreign. Like the face you wear is a mask passed down through generations' skin, stitched from someone else's mistakes. Eyes tuned to griefs you don't remember earning. That's not a symptom. That's Venus, and Venus is not a planet. It's a performance, a surface of blinding beauty and internal collapse. We're told Venus is Earth's twin, similar in size, similar in mass. But that's where the illusion ends. Venus is a horror behind a veil. Its clouds are thick with sulfuric acid. Its pressure is 90 times greater than Earth's. Its atmosphere is a tomb. Nothing survives on Venus, not because it's too far from the sun, but because it's too good at holding onto itself. Sound familiar? Venus is what happens when you trap. Everything inside the world tells you to be soft, to be kind, to be beautiful, to be the mirror in which others see what they want to see. But beneath that surface, pressure builds. You hold in the screams, you seal off the anger, you bury the doubt, and you smile. On Venus, it rains acid. But the rain never hits the ground, evaporates before it can land. Emotion here never completes its fall, just like yours. You want to cry, you want to rage, but the tears dry up before they reach your skin. The anger dissolves in performance. The fear gets dressed for work, and so you survive. But surviving isn't. Living. Venus spins backwards. A planet of retrograde rotation, its day longer than its year. One day on Venus lasts 243 Earth days. So long, the sun seems to rise in the west and set in the east. Time here is reversed. Trauma does this to you. You relive events out of sequence. You mourn things before they're gone. You anticipate betrayals before they arrive. Venus doesn't follow the rules of rotation. Neither does the mind in survival mode. You've felt this, haven't you? Waking up and not knowing whether it's yesterday or tomorrow. Living entire lives in your head while the clock on the wall hasn't moved. Experiencing time as an emotion, not a measurement. Venus is the planet of emotional time distortion, and yet it's dazzling, brightest object in the night sky after the moon, so brilliant. Ancient civilizations thought it was two separate stars, one rising, one falling. That's what you are when you pretend to be okay. Two stars, one that shines, one that drowns. Everyone sees the bright version, no? One sees the one falling into itself. Here's a cruel irony. Venus is covered in clouds. It reflects sunlight better than any other planet. Albedo of 0.9, nearly a perfect mirror. It reflects almost everything and absorbs almost nothing. A planet that is defined by its refusal to let anything in. You do this to reflect compliments, reflect pain, reflect connection, not because you don't want to feel, but because feeling has always been a risk. You learned early that vulnerability costs something. So you learned to shine instead, to become likable, to become safe, to become Venus. But deep beneath those clouds, there's no serenity. There's pressure, heat, collapse. The surface of Venus is hot enough to melt lead. The air is thick with carbon dioxide. It is not a planet. It is a sealed trauma response. You've smiled through breakdowns, haven't you? Laughed at funerals, worked during heartbreak, said I'm fine with the conviction of a goddamn sunrise. But inside, the heat never stops, because no one sees the internal climate. They only see the reflection. Let's talk about runaway feedback loops. Venus traps heat. Light enters through the clouds, but can't escape. So it builds, escalates, multiplies, until the planet becomes a furnace. Your thoughts do the same. A single doubt enters. What if they don't really care? And it stays. It loops. It compounds. Until every interaction becomes a threat. Replay words. Analyze tones. Study silences like sacred texts. Not because you're paranoid, but because you were trained by absence. Venus never had a chance to cool down. Neither did you. And here's the most disturbing part. Venus wasn't always like this. It might have once had oceans, might have once been temperate, balanced, until something shifted. Maybe a volcanic surge, maybe a slow atmospheric poisoning. But whatever it was, it crossed a threshold, and the planet never recovered. Trauma is a threshold. There's a version of you that existed before it, and a version after. But we only ever talk about the after, the survivor, the rebuilt. We never ask, what was lost? Who were you before the clouds, before the pressure, before the mirror? The idea of a twin planet comforts people. It makes us feel less alone in the void. But what if Venus is not a twin? What if it's a warning? A version of Earth where containment became collapse. A version of you where protection became suffocation. Venus isn't broken. It's adapted. It's become the best version of itself that survival would allow. But at what cost? The heat is over 450 degrees Celsius. The air crushes you. The light doesn't feel like light. It feels like judgment. This is the moment you realize you have been trying to breathe in a world that doesn't allow breath. That's not weakness. That's the physics of your reality. Venus doesn't apologize for its conditions. It simply is. But you've been apologizing for years for how you are. For being too emotional, too quiet, too much, too cold. Venus never asked for permission to be inhospitable. Why do you? Maybe the question isn't why you feel broken. Maybe the question is, what have you been reflecting that doesn't belong to you? Because mirrors don't show truth. They show light filtered through distortion. You've been reflecting expectations, projecting ideal versions, performing calm in chaos. And now when you finally look at yourself, you don't know who's staring back. That's not disassociation. That's Venus logic. You've spent so long being the brightest thing in other people's sky, you forgot what your own ground feels like, and you can't land there. Because every time you try, the pressure rises, the heat intensifies, the atmosphere fights back. This is not failure. This is physics. So, here's what you need to understand. Venus doesn't hate life. It just can't host it anymore. Some parts of you aren't cold or cruel. They're simply inhospitable, not by choice, by adaptation. And no one ever taught you the language of internal climate. But here's the question that remains, burning at the edge of your mental horizon. If the brightest thing in the sky is actually the most self-destructive, if the beauty is just a mask for pressure, heat, and collapse, then what does that say about everything you've ever wanted to become? And who are you if your radiance was never yours to begin with? When was the last time you were truly silent, not distracted, but genuinely silent? No phone, no noise, no thoughts you didn't create, just you, alone in your mind. And didn't it terrify you? Because silence isn't peace. It's a mirror held to the void inside you. And in that mirror, you see something darker than noise ever allowed. That's silence, that's stillness, that's Mercury. No air, no water, no atmosphere to speak of. Just a dead world, spiraling too close to the sun, burned on one side, frozen on the other, and in between. Nothing. Mercury is the paradox of extremes, a place where fire kisses ice, a world caught between incineration and isolation, and still it spins, still it orbits, still it endures. Sound familiar? You exist like this, burning with expectation in one moment, frozen in numbness the next, no balance, just violent opposites, switching without warning, because you were never taught moderation. You were taught survival, and survival doesn't care about consistency. It cares about endurance. Mercury is covered in scars, craters left by countless impacts. No atmosphere means no erosion. Nothing fades, nothing heals. Every wound remains. Every single one. How many of your scars are like that? Not bleeding anymore, but never erased, never softened, never rewritten. No rain to wash it away, only memory, sharp, permanent, fixed in place like Mercury's craters. You don't forget pain, you just stop talking about it. But silence is not healing. Silence is Mercury. Let's talk about heat, the side of Mercury facing. The sun can reach 430 degrees Celsius, the dark side, minus 180 degrees Celsius. What lives in that range? Nothing. Not because the planet lacks material, but because the contrast itself is violence. You've been there, the day you laughed so hard you forgot everything only to feel an emptiness that swallowed you whole 5 minutes later. The night you felt invincible and then paralyzed. The moment of joy turned immediately to grief. The friendship that felt like home until it didn't. You swing between fire and frost. You never get to just be. Mercury orbits the sun every 88 days. Fastest planet in the solar system. Always rushing, always circling, always exposed. That's how you've lived, isn't it? Always moving, always performing, never stopping. Because if you stop, the silence starts. And silence is where the weight lives. In that void between thought and noise. Something waits. Not a monster, a memory. The first time you realized you were alone. The first time someone didn't come back. The first time the world made no sense and no one explained why. You buried it, moved faster, kept orbiting. But Mercury is proof. Speed doesn't protect you from damage. It just ensures you see the same horror again and again because Mercury is tidally locked in a strange rhythm, a 3-to-2 spin-orbit resonance. It rotates 3 times for every 2 orbits, meaning the same regions face the sun at predictable intervals. It's a clock of trauma, a planetary pattern of recurrence, just like the way certain songs trigger you, just like the way a smell can break you. Just like the way every relationship eventually feels like that one person who left. You think you're healing. You think you've moved past it. But Mercury says otherwise. You're on a loop, and every loop ends in fire or freeze. Let's talk about light. Mercury is close to the sun, but its sky is always black. No atmosphere means no diffusion. No blue, no softness, just harsh contrast. Sunlight like a blade, shadow like a grave. This is the light of hyper-awareness, of over-analysis, of emotional survival mode. You've learned to see everything with sharp clarity, to anticipate rejection, to measure affection, to predict betrayal before it arrives. It's exhausting. But you don't know how to turn it off. Because turning it off means risking blindness. So you stay in that black sky, that raw light, that never-ending sharpness. Mercury doesn't blink. Neither do you. And now the question arises. What happens to a mind that never softens, that never gets a cloudy day, that never feels the shelter of atmosphere? It's calcifies. It doesn't break. Becomes fossilized in vigilance. You're not numb. You're overexposed. So here's the deeper horror. You don't trust peace. When things are quiet, you brace for chaos. When people are kind, you look for the knife. When you feel happy, you whisper, don't jinx it. Because Mercury taught you extremes are the rule. Balance is the lie. So even when life finally gives you calm, you reject it. You tell yourself it won't last. You prepare for fire. You prepare for freeze, but you don't prepare to stay, because nothing stays on Mercury. Nothing can. It has no moon, no anchor, nothing orbiting it in return. It moves around the sun alone, unaccompanied, unaffirmed, just. Like you, people orbit Earth, but you orbit others, always the observer, always the one who adapts, never the one who's orbited, never the center. Mercury is not a world, it's a wound on the sky, a black dot racing through light, unmoored. And here's the real question: what's the cost of living this close to the fire? Yes, you see everything. Yes, you move quickly. Yes, you've survived. But have you ever truly lived? Or have you just kept moving, too afraid to stop? Because if you did, if you really paused, the silence might consume you. The stillness might reveal a truth you've spent a lifetime escaping, that you don't know who you are without the orbit, without the scars, without the fire and freeze, that maybe you were never built for balance. And if that's true, if you're wired like Mercury, then here's the final, searing thought. If silence is where the truth waits, what happens the moment you finally listen? And can you bear to hear what's been whispering to you all along? There's a thought you've had but never spoken aloud. If I disappeared right now, would the world even notice? That's Venus, not the goddess, not the beauty, not the morning star glowing gently in a pastel sky. The real Venus, the one wrapped in poison, the one burning beneath clouds, the one that pretends to shine. You've seen her in the sky, haven't you? Bright, calm, serene. But that light is a lie, because behind that glow is the most hostile surface in the solar system. Venus is the paradox of appearances. To the eye, it looks like Earth's sister, same size, same shape, almost the same orbit, but the resemblance ends there. Its clouds are sulfuric acid. Its atmosphere is a choking blanket of carbon dioxide. Its pressure, 92 times that of Earth's, standing on the surface, would crush you, burn you, dissolve you, all at once. Venus is the world that looks like it should be safe, but isn't. Maybe so do you. You smile, you function, you give advice, you shine, but inside, you're boiling. You've taught yourself how to emulate normalcy, to reflect light, to stay bright enough that no one asks what's underneath, but you and I know that brightness is a shell, a defense mechanism forged under pressure so immense, even you can't always feel it anymore. Venus doesn't rotate like Earth, it spins. Backward, retrograde, and slowly. One day on Venus is longer than a year. That's right, a single rotation takes 243 Earth days. So while it moves around the sun in 225 days, it barely turns, meaning the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. Everything is reversed. Everything is slow. Time stretches. Direction flips. Nothing works the way it should, and maybe neither do you. Because when you're under enough emotional pressure, time doesn't move right. Minutes stretch into eternities. Sleep vanishes. Days blend. Your internal rotation collapses, and everything feels reversed. You tell a joke to cover a breakdown. You laugh when you want to cry. You celebrate while something in you grieves. You've learned to move backwards, to dot, because forward stopped making sense a long time ago. Let's go deeper. Venus once had water, maybe even oceans, but something went wrong. A runaway greenhouse effect. Carbon choked the air. The water boiled away, and the planet was sealed in death, not through collision, not through war, but through accumulation, little by little, like the way your inner thoughts stacked up, one emotion unexpressed, one fear denied, one truth buried, until suddenly everything boiled, and you couldn't breathe, and no one could see it, because the surface still looked normal, just like Venus, just like you. You ever wonder how something that looked so alive could become so hostile? You ever wake up and realize you don't remember who you were before the mask went on? Venus doesn't forget what it was. It just can't return to it. No matter how bright it looks from Earth, its surface will never know cool again. Its atmosphere will never clear. Its oceans will never come back. Maybe you've wondered if some parts of you are like that, too, permanently changed, not because you wanted it, not because you chose it, but because something crept in when you weren't looking, and it never left. Let's talk about light again. Venus is so reflective. It shines brilliantly in our sky. It reflects 70% of the sunlight it receives. But do you know why? Because of its clouds, thick, toxic clouds that bounce light outward, but block everything from entering. Nothing penetrates, nothing warms, nothing touches what lies beneath. It reflects beauty while hiding death, a mirror made of lies. You've done this too, haven't you? Projected the version of yourself others needed to see, curated kindness, polished resilience, but behind it, unspoken pain, unreachable thoughts, unprocessed rage. You reflect so much, yet let nothing in, not because you don't want love, but because love requires exposure. And you learned long ago, exposure means danger. Venus has no magnetic field, which means the solar wind, the radiation from the sun strips away particles from its atmosphere. It is slowly, invisibly decaying. Even now, and so are you, because no matter how well you pretend, no matter how bright you reflect, without protection, the damage accumulates in whispers, in sighs, in forgotten memories that still shape your decisions. You're being stripped by time, layer by invisible layer, and yet nobody sees it because you keep shining. But here's a terrifying fact. Venus is locked in thermal equilibrium. It's always the same temperature, day or night, sun or shadow, doesn't matter. Why? Because the heat is trapped inside, the same way your anxiety doesn't care if everything is going well, the same way your sadness shows up even on happy days, the same way your thoughts circle you, unaffected by logic or reassurance. The trauma is internal. The temperature never drops. You can't cool down because your atmosphere never lets anything out. It's not that you're not trying. It's that you've built a system to contain what should have been released, and now you can't find the door. But Venus wasn't always like this. It might have been beautiful once, balanced, maybe even habitable, and maybe you were too. So what changed? Not a single moment, a slow death, a drifting process, one that looked like survival until it wasn. Single quotes to Venus is the cost of unprocessed pressure. And so are you. Now, here's the part that shatters you. Venus is so similar to Earth that early astronomers thought it might be a twin, a mirror, another home. But when we finally got close enough to see beneath the clouds, it was nothing like we hoped, just hell wearing Earth's skin. You've done this to yourself, haven't you? Told people you were okay. that you were just tired, that you didn't want to talk about it, that everything was fine, until someone got close and saw the truth, and even then you turned away, because if they truly saw everything, they might leave, and worse, they might stay, and then you'd have to explain it all, and you don't have the words, you just have the heat. So here's the question Venus leaves you with. If someone finally broke through your clouds, would they find a place they could love, or a landscape too hostile to survive? What if you're not orbiting the truth? What if the truth is orbiting you, too distant to touch, too close to escape? Now we descend into Earth. No, not the one beneath your feet, not the blue marble from space, not the home you think you know. We're not talking about land masses and oceans. We're talking about the thing beneath that, the ancient machinery, the spinning core, seething furnace that never sleeps, that version of Earth. Because Earth isn't a planet, it's ATRAPDOOR, to memory, to perception, to the illusion of stability. It spins, it tilts, it wobles, and somehow you never notice, like your thoughts, like your moods, like your sense of self. You pretend the ground beneath you is solid, but Earth isn't solid. It's molten in its heart, its crust fractured into plates. It's always shifting. So why do you trust it? Because you were born here, because it feels familiar, because instability, when experienced long enough, starts to feel like home. You've mistaken routine for truth. You've mistaken gravity for meaning. Let's begin with a lie you've always believed, that down exists, but Earth has no up or down, just attraction, just gravity pulling you toward its core, which is spinning beneath. You at 1,000 miles per hour, you're anchored by a force you cannot see, drawn toward a center you'll never touch, and yet, but grounded in what? In spinning magma, in tectonic plates floating on semi-liquid stone, in a magnetic field that flips every few 100,000 years. Earth is the illusion of stability, and so are you. You call yourself a self, a person, but beneath that identity, 1,000 shifting pressures, chemical tides, buried trauma, neural networks firing like seismic tremors. You are a walking fault line. One wrong memory, one sharp word, and everything shifts. What do you really know about your core? Have you ever truly looked? Let's go deeper. The Earth's magnetic field is generated by motion in its molten iron core. This invisible field protects you from solar radiation. It allows compasses to work. It draws the auroras across the poles. Without it, life couldn't exist. But here's what they don't tell you. The field reverses. It flips, sometimes gradually, sometimes chaotically. North becomes south, south becomes north. And it happens without warning, just like your thoughts, just like when you suddenly feel alien in your own skin, when your values, beliefs, and fears seem to change places. When love feels like fear and silence becomes unbearable. What flipped? Nothing external, just the core inside, you shifting. You didn't plan it, you didn't ask for it, but now you can't find north anymore, and no one else noticed, because the surface stayed calm, still smiling, still smiling, single quotes. The outer shell of Earth is broken into tectonic plates. These plates float on molten rock, moving centimeters per year. It sounds slow, But the implications are enormous. Continents drift, mountains rise, earthquakes strike without warning. You are made of similar layers: outer self, stable, functional, socially acceptable; inner magma, chaotic, emotional, burning; and between them, the slow grind of psychological tectonics, memories shifting, beliefs subducting, new identities forming like volcanic islands. But here's the horror: you're never truly aware of the movement until something breaks. A panic attack, a depressive spiral, an existential crisis that splits your emotional crust. Then you feel it, the instability you've buried, and you wonder how long it's been moving without your permission. But Earth isn't just movement, it's rhythm. The moon pulls its tides, sunlight defines its days. Life evolved around cycles. But what happens when the rhythm breaks? When night stretches too long? When the tide doesn't come back? What happens when the inner metronome you've always trusted skips a beat? That's what insomnia is. That's what dissociation is. A skipped beat in the cycle of self. A moon that doesn't pull. A sea that forgets how to return. And suddenly you're not grounded anymore. You're drifting. Let's look at the biosphere. Earth is teeming with life. But all that life exists in a razor-thin layer, barely a few kilometers deep. Above that, deadly radiation. Below, crushing heat. Life is a miracle of balance, a breath in the chaos, a fluke, and your consciousness lives in a similar sliver. Your mania, delusion, psychosis; below it, depression, oblivion, catatonia. You balance on that edge every day. Call it normal. You feel the winds shifting, and you know the storm hasn't passed. It's just paused. Let's go deeper still. Did you know Earth rings after an earthquake? It vibrates subtly, like a struck bell. Those frequencies echo for days, even weeks. You do this too. After the trauma, after the break, you keep ringing. On the surface, everything returns to normal. But if someone listened closely, they'd hear it. The tremor in your voice, the pause before answering, the silence when someone asks if you're okay. You're still ringing, but they don't hear it, because they're not listening, because they don't want to, because if they did, they might start to ring too. Let's talk about fossils. Earth remembers everything. Every extinction, every flood, every firestorm. It traps them in stone, buried, compressed, forgotten, until one day someone digs. Traumas sealed in emotional amber. You've forgotten their details, but they remember you. And when the right thought drills deep enough, they surface, and you're not you anymore. You're the child, the victim, the frightened version that never got to speak. Your surface didn't know, but your layers did, and they were waiting. Here's the final descent. The Earth is alive. Not metaphorically, not poetically, alive. It breathes, it bleeds, lava. It shifts, and screams, and cracks. And one day, it will devour us, not out of anger, but out of inevitability. The sun will swell, the oceans will boil, the crust will crack, and everything will end. Not with a bang, but with the slow forgetting of what it ever meant to be human. And you're alive. Not poetically, but fractally. You echo at every level. Microbiome to memory, synapse to society. But you, too, are eroding, aging, forgetting, becoming something you can't quite name. You've buried truths in your crust. You've flipped poles in your core. You've let yourself believe this world. Your world is stable, but it's not. It never was. It never will be. So here's the question Earth leaves behind. If your stability is just a pause between quakes, what part of you is already cracking beneath the surface? You've been trying to escape for as long as you can remember, not from a place, not from a person, but from a sensation, the weight of being watched by your own mind. That pressure, that's Mars, not the red dust, not the desert, not the fantasy of terraforming. Mars is the embodiment of distance, of yearning, of almost. It's the place we keep pointing to. The dream just out of reach. We romanticize it. We build machines and launch them into the void. But no one asks the real question. Why do we need another world so badly? Because this one hurts. Because we've ruined the ground beneath our feet and can't face the guilt. Or because, deep down, we know we were never meant to stay here. Mars is not a sanctuary. It's a mirror. And what it reflects is brutal isolation, abandonment, the illusion of closeness. Look at a map of the solar system. See how Earth and Mars hover near each other. Now measure the space between them. Even when we're close, we're separated by a silence too vast to scream through. You know this feeling. You've sat across from someone you love and still felt light years away. Your thoughts orbit, your words fail, and everything you say leaves you lonelier. Mars is that feeling, scaled to a planet, a world that almost had life, that almost had oceans, that almost held on, but didn't. And maybe you feel like that too. A story of ALMOSTS, almost healed, almost understood, almost enough, but just like Mars. Something in you dried up before you could finish becoming. Let's talk atmosphere. Mars has one technically, but it's thin, weak, barely there. It whispers instead of shields. It fails to hold warmth. It lets radiation in. Imagine standing under the Martian sky. No air to breathe. No pressure to keep your blood liquid. No protection from the sun's invisible daggers. That's what it feels like when you've been emotionally exposed too long. When your defenses have eroded. When you walk into a room and feel everything, every glance, every silence, every unspoken judgment. Your skin holds, but something inside starts to boil. Because you weren't built to endure constant exposure. You need shelter. You need something thicker than survival. But Mars doesn't have it, and maybe neither do you anymore. Now consider the storms. Mars has them. Dust storms that cover the entire planet. Winds that last for weeks. But they don't sound like hurricanes. They sound like whispers. Because the air is so thin, even hurricane force winds can't knock you over. They just hiss past you, like ghosts, like memories, trying to be heard again. You've had storms like this, not loud, not obvious, just moods that settle in and refuse to leave. Thoughts that cover every surface of your mind. You can't see clearly. You can't breathe fully. You're caught in something others can't even perceive, because your pain doesn't come in screams. It comes in dust, fine, silent, suffocating. And when it finally lifts, you don't feel healed. You feel empty. Let's go deeper into the canyons. Mars holds the largest canyon in the solar system, Volais, Marineris. It stretches over 4,000 kilometers. It could swallow Everest, but it wasn't formed by water or impact. It was formed by stress, by tectonic tension pulling the crust apart. No collision, no explosion, just pressure, accumulated, unspoken, until the ground tore open. Sound familiar? Your mind works the same way. You think you're okay because nothing's exploded, but inside, the pressure is building. And one day, without warning, you crack. And the rift is wide, and the fall is deep, and no one understands how something invisible created something that ruins you. But Mars knows. Mars remembers. Let's talk about what used to be. Mars once had rivers, oceans, lakes, a magnetic field. Evidence shows it had all the conditions for life. Then they disappeared. The field collapsed. The atmosphere thinned. The water fled to the poles or into space, and what was left? A memory. Mars is the grave of potential. And maybe there are parts of you that feel like that too. Abilities you lost, people you pushed away, emotions you no longer trust. You didn't destroy them, they just leaked out over time. And now, all that remains is a ghost of who you could have been. And still, you pretend you're fine. You post, you reply, you perform stability, even as you feel your atmosphere thinning, even as the warmth escapes, even as your inner oceans dry. Here's another horror. Mars has echoes. We've sent rovers, drones, instruments. They record sounds, wind, machine noise. But always, in the background silence, a silence so total, it isn't peace, it's warning. You hear that silence inside yourself sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, in the pause before sleep, in the moment you realize you haven't felt joy in weeks. That's not absence, it's aftermath. Mars isn't empty, it's post-life, and so are parts of you. Now imagine this. You finally arrive. We colonize Mars. We build domes. We plant seeds. We call it home. But the gravity is wrong. The air isn't real. The sun is farther. Your bones weaken. Your muscles shrink. Your body knows. You were never meant to live here. Even if you build cities. Even if you laugh. Even if you pretend. And maybe that's your inner world right now. You've built routines, relationships, goals, but something in you knows this isn't home. This isn't the life you were meant to live. You're surviving in a simulation of healing, but your heart is still 54 million kilometers away from peace. So here's the question. Mars leaves you with, if you finally reached the place you've always dreamed of, and it couldn't hold you, what would you tell yourself to keep from falling apart? How far does a lie have to travel before it forgets it's a lie? Somewhere between hope and delusion. You stop asking questions. You just keep moving outward, because there's always another planet, another promise, another chance to believe something that will break you in a new and interesting way. Welcome to Jupiter. No surface, no ground, no bottom, just cloud, just pressure, just depth. You fall in, expecting something solid. But Jupiter was never meant to catch you. It was meant to devour you, softly, patiently, with layers of atmosphere that mimic comfort, right until the moment you're crushed. Does that sound familiar? You've been there. In relationships that promised grounding but gave you gravity wells. In systems that claimed to support you but only pulled you deeper. In thoughts that appeared helpful until they started looping. You thought you could manage it, navigate it, float through. But Jupiter doesn't let you float. It pulls and pulls and pulls until the pressure liquefies your logic. Until even your questions dissolve into hydrogen rain. Let's talk mass. Jupiter holds 70% of all the planetary mass in the solar system. That means everything else, the rocky worlds, the gas dwarfs, the icy bodies, they're minor shadows compared to this giant. And that's how intrusive thoughts work. 2. They don't feel like one thought. They feel like a system, a presence, a central weight around which your other ideas must orbit. You try to move away, but you're trapped in the gravitational pull of a belief you don't remember choosing. I'm not enough. I always ruin things. No one really sees me. Thoughts like these become Jupiter in your mind, so massive they curve the space around you, so persistent they shape the flow of your inner solar system, even when you think you've escaped them. Your entire trajectory still bends around their invisible mass. And the worst part, they don't shout, they whisper, like wind through clouds, like lightning inside storms that never touch ground. You hear the thunder, but you can't trace it. You feel the unease, but can't explain it. That's Jupiter's trick. It's made of noise, but no anchor. Made of color, but no form. Even its famous surface is a lie. You can't land on it. You just keep falling into thicker gas, denser layers, hotter storms, until there's no you left to feel the descent. Science confirms this. No one knows what lies at Jupiter's core. Some say a rocky center, others metallic hydrogen, still others a soup of superheated elements under pressures beyond comprehension. Translation. Even with data, we don't understand it. Even with tools, we can't reach it. Even with models, we're still guessing. And that's what it's like to try and understand your own emotional core. You dig, you meditate, you journal, you therapize. But the deeper you go, the weirder it gets. What seemed solid becomes vapor. What felt certain turns fluid. You find pain that isn't yours. You find memories you don't trust. You find voices that don't sound like your own. Is this trauma? Is this biology? Is this God? The deeper you fall, the less the question matters. Because at a certain depth, you're no longer asking, you're just enduring. Let's talk about the storms. You know the one, the great red spot, a storm larger than Earth. It's been raging for centuries. And here's what's terrifying. It's slowly shrinking, changing color, morphing into something else, but not stopping. You've had storms like that in your life. They don't go away, they just evolve. Sadness becomes numbness. Anxiety becomes withdrawal. Anger becomes silence. The storm remains. You just learn to breathe inside it. And people call that healing, but it's not. It's adaptation to madness. It's building a home inside the hurricane. It's learning the names of your demons and letting them tuck you in at night. Because what else are you supposed to do? You can't outrun Jupiter. You live within it. And so you forget what calm even looks like. Now, let's zoom out. Look at Jupiter's moons, over 90 of them, some small and broken, others like Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto almost planets in their own right. They orbit the giant, but they're fascinating on their own. Some hold oceans beneath their icy crusts. Some may even harbor life. But here's the twist. They're trapped, forever pulled by the gravity of a planet that cannot love them back. And that's the metaphor. How many parts of you, beautiful, curious parts, stuck in orbit around the wrong center, around approval, around fear, around someone who left. You are moons pretending to be complete planets, but you still revolve around your wound. No escape velocity, just endless circling. And every time you get close to liberation, Jupiter tugs you back, because trauma is loyal. It remembers, it repeats, even when you outgrow it, even when you know better, even when you swear you're done, you fall back into orbit, and the cycle begins again. So maybe we need to ask the dangerous question: what happens if you try to escape? Jupiter is the king of gravity. To break free, you'd need to go faster than you've ever gone. You'd need to burn everything: fuel, fear, memory, and still, you might not make it. You might just end up in a different orbit, around a different thought, a different storm. That's what healing looks like sometimes. It's not peace, it's just a new pattern, a prettier prison. But there's one more thing to consider. Deep inside Jupiter's chaotic depth, there might be a secret, something more solid than theory, a truth too dense for instruments, a place pressure becomes clarity. Maybe buried beneath the illusions, there is a core, something real, something heavy enough to be trusted, but to reach it, you'd have to survive the descent. You'd have to resist the hallucinations of the clouds. You'd have to become pressure resistant, emotionally flameproof, and maybe, just maybe, the storm would part, the noise would cease, and you'd finally see the thing that all the storms were protecting. Not a monster, not a void, but a truth so heavy it has its own gravity. And it's this: you were never meant to orbit someone else's madness. You were meant to find your own mass. So, here's what I leave you with. If Jupiter is made of clouds and sound and collapse, and you are made of the same things, how do you know which storm is yours, and which one you were forced to inherit? How do you freeze pain without killing it? Welcome to Saturn, the jewel of the solar system, a spectacle of symmetry, a floating deception. You think of the rings first, don't you? Those elegant bands, flawless, intricate, delicate. Saturn doesn't care about aesthetics. It doesn't care what you find beautiful, because those rings are not light, they're debris, frozen violence, billions of shards, size, dust, broken moons, failed formations, orbiting endlessly, trapped in a spectacle mistaken for grace. It's the most elegant graveyard in our solar system, and yet we stare in awe. You've done the same thing with your own broken pieces, haven't you? Taken trauma and spun it into something performative, aestheticized the ache, turned your coping mechanisms into identity, polished your pain just enough that others confuse it for strength. But what are you really orbiting? What were you trying to protect? Saturn is cold, so cold that hydrogen acts like metal, so cold that clouds arrange themselves in hexagons, not by magic, but by pressure, temperature, and instability. Yes, the planet has a six-sided storm at its pole, a geometric abyss spinning for decades, a perfect polygon of chaos, and somehow that shape has persisted. You've done that too, structured your dysfunction, codified your descent, learned how to spiral in a way that looks controlled. You smile in 6 directions. You dissociate in hexagons because it feels better to label the storm than to admit it consumes you. But labeling doesn't stop the pull. Let's talk about mass again. Saturn is massive, over 95 times the mass of Earth, but its density is so low it could float in water. That's right. A planet so huge it dominates the sky is mostly illusion, mostly gas, mostly volume without substance. You've done that too, made yourself appear bigger than the emptiness inside, not for ego, For survival, you needed to seem whole, to convince others you were fine, to avoid being asked the questions you were terrified to answer. So you expanded emotionally, took on burdens, became the funny one, the strong one, the one who's always got it together. But inside, you were Saturn, floating, empty, light enough to drown in your own weightlessness. Now let's return to those rings. Do you know how old they are? Scientists debate it constantly. Some say they formed with Saturn billions of years ago. Others say they're new, temporary, just a cosmic accident that will dissolve in a few 100 million years. They could vanish, just like that, gone. And here's the quiet horror. You are the same. You don't know how long you've been broken this way. You don't know if your coping systems are ancient or recent. You don't know if they're fading or if they're your final form. You just keep orbiting, smiling through rings of memory you can't escape, and pretending it's beautiful. But the most haunting feature of Saturn isn't the rings. It's the silence. It doesn't scream like Jupiter. It doesn't bake like Venus. It doesn't seduce like Earth. Saturn is restraint. It is the quiet in your chest after the panic fades. It is the numbness that follows a breakdown. It is the blank space after your therapist asks, "How did that make you feel?" And you honestly don't know, because Saturn isn't about reaction. It's about suppression. It's about sealing the wound with cold and pretending it never happened. But here's the catch. The ice in those rings is constantly colliding. Tiny impacts, microscopic destruction, every moment, every orbit. It looks still from afar, but inside, constant fragmentation. You've lived that, holding it together, looking pristine, but feeling the 1,000 small breaks that no one sees. You wake up fine. You go to work. You respond to messages. You say, "I'm doing okay." But inside you, pieces grind, tiny collisions, barely perceptible, until one day something cracks. A memory, a sentence, a look, and suddenly the entire ring shatters. You call it a panic attack, a spiral, a breakdown. But it was building for years, and like Saturn, you wonder what happens when the illusion collapses. What's left when the orbit fails? Let's talk about time. Saturn has the slowest visible movement of any bright planet in the night sky. It drifts, barely noticeable, like grief, like the slow loss of self. You don't realize it's happening until one day you can't remember who you were before the numbness set in. You check photos. You reread messages. You try to feel the person you used to be, but that version of you is gone, evaporated in the gas layers, trapped in rings you no longer recognize. And when you try to reach for them, your hands pass through, because memory doesn't have a surface, only weight, only orbit, only echo. And maybe that's Saturn's most honest trait. It never pretends to let you land. You don't get closure here, only distance, only gravity without contact, only beauty that never allows touch. So ask yourself this: when did you last feel something real? Not performative, not rehearsed, not ring-shaped, but real. When was the last time you stood still and let the collapse happen? No masks, no metaphors, no "I'm fine," just entropy. Have you ever even tried? Because if you haven't, Saturn waits, and it doesn't offer healing, only reflection, only orbit, only the cold truth that your fragments are still in motion, still circling, still crashing, even as you pretend they've settled. So the question now is simple and terrible. If Saturn is made of beautiful ruins, what does that make you? Have you ever tried to scream in a vacuum? Your mouth opens, your lungs collapse with pressure, your throat shapes the sound, but nothing leaves, because sound needs a medium, and Neptune doesn't give you one. It just stares, silent, frozen, unreachable. You've never been this far from the sun. You've never been this far from warmth. And yet you're still expected to orbit, still expected to function, still expected to feel something through the cold. But Neptune isn't about feeling. It's about the absence of feeling. A blue world, blurred with methane and mystery, standing as the final sentry of your solar descent. It's the far edge of knowing, the boundary of meaning, and it asks you one question with a voice you'll never hear. How long can something go unseen before it forgets how to be real? Neptune is not a planet, it's a hallucination of distance. Everything here is exaggerated. The winds scream louder than anywhere else in the solar system, over 1,200 miles per hour. But you'll never hear them. The storms here are monstrous, spanning continents, tearing through the sky, but they're veiled beneath clouds too thick to see through. Neptune is screaming in ways you'll never perceive. It is suffering without an audience. You've done that too, haven't you? Had thoughts so loud they blurred your vision, had nights where the silence felt like punishment, had days where your mind spun at 1,200 miles per hour, but no one noticed the storm, because your face stayed calm, because your answers stayed safe, because the only screaming you allowed was internal. You became Neptune, the outermost layer, far enough that no one checked, distant enough that your collapse looked like peace. You were not ignored, you were forgotten, and that's worse, isn't it? Because being forgotten means you're no longer in the model, no longer considered in the calculations, no longer real. Let's go deeper. Neptune's interior is a nightmare of compression, pressures so high that methane transforms into diamond. Yes, it rains diamonds here, but not gently. They form miles beneath the surface, forged by unbearable force, falling, crashing, shattering. The planet bleeds with jewels you'll never touch. It glitters with pain. It shines with agony refined through distance. Tell me, what have you buried so deep that it crystallized? What pressure did you survive that changed the structure of your soul? You think of trauma as chaos, but sometimes it's precise. Sometimes it sculpts you. Sometimes it turns you into something valuable, but only in the ways that destroy you. A diamond is beautiful because of how much it withstood, but it is also, ultimately, just compressed carbon. You are not special because you hurt. You are not unique because you survived. You are just one more shard in the falling sky, and that should terrify you, because Neptune doesn't care that you endured. It doesn't mark your suffering. It doesn't carve your name into its storms. It just keeps turning cold, perfect, indifferent. So ask yourself, if the universe forgets your pain, was it ever real? If no one saw your descent, did you ever fall? Neptune is the last stop before darkness. Beyond it, only emptiness, the Oort cloud, the void, mathematical ghosts of planets that may not exist. It is the boundary where memory and imagination blur. You've been there too, haven't you? That mental edge dot, where thoughts turn abstract, where the world no longer makes narrative sense, where you forget what day it is, what time it is, what year it is, and no one notices, because you still smile, because you still respond, because, from the outside, you still orbit, but you are already gone, already past Neptune, already disintegrating into ideas, already dissolving into symbols. Your name becomes a concept, your face becomes a mask, your thoughts become fragments too faint to hold, and no one comes to find you because no one knew you left. The most disturbing fact about Neptune: it was discovered through mathematics before it was ever seen. That's right, we predicted its presence based on irregularities in another planet's orbit. We felt its gravity before we ever confirmed its face. That's how people find out you're suffering too, isn't it? They feel it in the ripple effect. They notice the instability around you, but they don't see you. They don't look directly. You are an indirect discovery, a disturbance in someone else's data. And when they finally point the telescope at you, it's not to understand, it's to confirm what they already suspected. And even then, you're still too far, still too faint, still too blue dot, still too broken by distance. Neptune orbits the Sun every 165 years, a full revolution longer than any human life. That means no one alive has seen Neptune return to the same point it occupied when they were born. Its year is longer than your existence. Its motion is a timeline you'll never complete. So here's a thought experiment. If your emotional orbit takes longer than a lifetime, do you ever really heal? What if your traumas aren't cyclical but glacial? What if your grief doesn't come and go, but just moves slowly enough that you mistake it for growth? What if you've spent your whole life interpreting motion as progress, but really you've just been falling outward, farther, colder, quieter, until you reached this place, Neptune, where pain becomes weather, where distance becomes identity, where silence becomes God. And now you're here, looking back at the sun.a, memory.a, warmth you can't feel anymore, and you wonder, not if you can return, but if you were ever really there to begin with. Because the farther you drift, the more the light warps, the more the truth, refracts, the more you question if you ever belonged to the inner world, to the warmth, to the story. And that's the final cruelty, not being alone, but always having been. So the question is no longer whether anyone will find you. They won't. The question is, when you vanish, will you even notice? What happens when even the edge has edges? You thought Neptune was the end, but there's something beyond it. It isn't a planet. It isn't official. It isn't consistent, but it's there. Pluto, the exile, the not quite, the almost, stripped of status, reduced by consensus, a celestial body shamed by language. You know that feeling intimately, don't you? To be told you're not enough, not a person, but a projection, not a self, but a symptom, not a world, but a wound, orbiting where no one looks. Pluto is a paradox of identity, massive enough to have moons, complex enough to have seasons, active enough to reshape its surface, and still denied planethood. How many times have you changed, only to be told you're still wrong? How often have you outgrown the name they gave you, only for them to pretend you never mattered at all? You learned to orbit sham, EFULLY, like Pluto, on a tilted path, eccentric, off, axis, a dark ballet, 248 years long, arcing through silence, curving through ridicule. But the deeper horror of Pluto isn't its distance, it's its shadow. A shadow so long that it crosses into places sunlight never reaches. Parts of its surface have never known warmth, not once, not ever. There are entire craters on Pluto, locked in eternal darkness, frozen, sealed, untouched by day. What part of you has never seen the light? Not metaphorically, literally. The memory you swore you'd take to your grave. The thought you wouldn't even confess to yourself that one night. You can't describe without your throat closing. That part of you Pluto knows it. It is it you buried. It because you thought forgetting was healing. But forgetting is just frost. It doesn't fix the scar. It just stops it from moving. Until one day, something shifts, and the dark side turns, and the sun hits it for the first time, and suddenly, you feel again, and you remember why you buried it, and you wish you hadn't turned, but it's too late, because some memories don't reawaken gently. They lurch, they scream, they fracture reality. Pluto rotates slower than Earth, slower than Mars, 6 Earth days to complete one spin. That's not time. That's ache. That's grief stretched into orbit. It's the long process of remembering, of thawing, of realizing you've been cold for so long. You forgot what warmth costs, because warmth isn't just comfort, it's exposure, it's vulnerability, it's the slow collapse of the armor you thought you needed. And the question is, are you ready to melt? Let's go deeper. Pluto has a heart. That's what they called it when we first got images. A vast, icy plain shaped like a heart on its surface. But it's not sentimental. It's nitrogen ice. Cold, cracked, alien. That's your version of love now, isn't it? Structured, distant, safe. You offer it, cautiously, conditionally. A heart encased in rules. Don't get too close. Don't ask too much. Don't stay too long, because love has become surveillance, a calculation of who might abandon you. Next, Pluto's heart isn't beating, it's remembering. The landscape is made of impact scars, things that hit and stayed. You've lived the same way. You call it a personality, but it's just a map of what hurt you. And every time someone gets close, they have to walk those craters. And you watch silently to see if they'll fall in. But you never warn them, do you? Because part of you wants them to, so you can confirm the prophecy. They'll leave. They'll fail. They'll prove you were right to freeze. But what if they don't? What if someone navigates your surface with care? Would you even recognize it? Would you accept it? Or would you retreat, farther, colder, slower? Back to your elliptical path, back to your long year of solitude, back to the exile you've learned to romanticize, because Pluto doesn't orbit alone. It dances with Charon, a moon so large relative to Pluto, they orbit a point in space outside themselves, not around one another, but around a shared absence, a gravitational ghost. They spin around a nothing. That's your relationships too, isn't it? Not around shared purpose, not around mutual growth, but around a shared lack, a mirrored trauma, a mutual loneliness, a center that isn't love but void. And you call it connection because it feels like gravity, but it's just alignment of wounds, two broken bodies orbiting the same silence. And if either one changes course, the dance ends. That's the danger of trauma-bonding. It feels cosmic, fated, but it's just synchronized collapse. So what happens if you heal? Will they still recognize you, or will they vanish, revealing that the only thing holding you together was the shared orbit of pain? There's something else. Pluto has mountains, not of rock but of water, ice, because here, ice is stronger than stone. It's too cold for it to melt, too frozen to fall, so it rises like bone beneath skin. This is the final metaphor, isn't it? You dot your thoughts dot your defense systems, rising unnaturally, structures born not from growth but stasis. You've been still so long, your stillness fossilized, and you call it resilience, but it's just preservation. Pluto isn't living, it's resisting decay. There's a difference, and yet something stirs beneath the surface. Subsurface oceans, possibly warm, possibly hidden, possibly alive. We don't know for sure, but the possibility itself changes everything. It means life could exist in exile. That warmth could persist in the coldest mind. That something else is possible, but only if you dig, only if you breach the shell, only if you risk breaking the frost and letting something bleed. And that's where you are now, standing on the edge of yourself, looking inward, not at a planet, not at a symbol, but at the coldest, farthest part of your psyche. And realizing you're still orbiting, still waiting, still asking, if I was never a planet to them, was I ever a self to me?